I'm sure it goes without saying, but I had a lot of dinosaur books growing up. A lot of those dinosaur books are lost to time. I have no idea where they are today. But every once in a while, I'll find a book that I had as a child at a place like Barnes and Noble, and then I'll purchase it because I think it'd be really cool if my daughter was able to read some of the books that I had as a kid. Well, one of those books is Dinosaurs A to Z, for kids who really love dinosaurs. I remember this one. This one was always a really fun one for me. Again, I have no idea what happened to it, but there's like vague memories of me flipping through it like constantly throughout the day. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this book and kind of see how the designs hold up to our modern understanding of the animals that they're representing. We got 26 dinosaurs to take a look at here, so let's just get right into it. So A is typically like Allosaurus or something. Yes, Allosaurus. That is certainly a very interesting design that I think I saw all over the place. These are like some models that I remember seeing in a lot of books, like quite consistently. So yeah, this is a pretty different depiction of Allosaurus. Quite fitting for a dinosaur that's the name literally translates to different lizard. But it's like a lot more hunched forward. It does have a lot of the traits that you would probably expect from Allosaurus, like the long arms with these long claws. But look at that size chart right there. That is way oversized. Certainly an interesting one. And also, of course, they do provide information on the right next to the dinosaur. I'm not going to read all of them for sake of brevity, but I'll read this one. I'm a meat eater and I like to go hunting with my friends. I am huge, scary, and I have very sharp teeth. I like to eat other dinosaurs, especially big ones with long necks. Yeah, so that kind of like hints at the fact that Allosaurus might have been a pack hunter. We don't really have evidence for that in Allosaurus. In fact, we don't really have evidence of pack hunting in most dinosaurs that are depicted as pack hunters. That's not to say that it never happened, but we just don't really have evidence to help support it. It is possible that Allosaurus would go after like younger sauropods and things like that, but the larger sauropods, probably not. Anyway, let's move on to B for baryonyx. This is a very interesting baryonyx design right here. I love the colors. The colors are really, really sick. But the snout is, of course, too small, and the head shape is pretty much all off. It is breaking its wrists as well, and it doesn't seem like it has its heavy claw, which, the thumb claw baryonyx was significantly larger than the other claws. That's not really showcased here. I mean, one of the claws is certainly a little bit larger than the others, but it's not really noticeable, if that makes sense. C for Coelophysis. This is a fun design. Again, I remember seeing this all the time when I was younger. It does have a lot of the traits that we would expect from Coelophysis. Like it's very thin and elongated, and it has a skinny neck. And the head is actually kind of the correct shape as well. A lot of these are, of course, shrink wrapped, but I feel like that was pretty common for a lot of these earlier depictions. It does lack feathers, which also makes sense because a lot of like earlier media didn't really portray dinosaurs with feathers. Coelophysis, though, we don't actually have direct fossil evidence of it possessing feathers, but there is still a chance that it did have them in life. We just don't know for sure. D is for Diplodocus, and this is a good design, actually. This feels like a very classic Diplodocus design right here. It's also holding its neck up, which is that's seems to be the most correct idea for how Diplodocus would hold its neck anyway, which would be a little bit more elevated off the ground instead of like really low horizontal with the ground, like how it's portrayed in Walking with Dinosaurs. Oddly enough, though, this one does kind of like it screams it really kind of screams Apatosaurus, at least in terms of like the colors, or Brontosaurus, because a lot of earlier Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus depictions kind of portrayed it like this. Which that kind of still works out because they're all diplodocids. E is for Eupilocephalus. Fun things about this is that you get into like some lesser known dinosaurs. Eupilocephalus is definitely that one. It's an ankylosaur. Obviously, it looks very similar to Ankylosaurus, but there are like a few distinctions about it. I really like this model here too. Honestly, this model kind of feels like it holds up decently well to like by today's standards. The osteoderms look really cool. I really like the way that the head looks, and yeah, it's really not a terrible Eupilocephalus design. Oh, now we have Fabrosaurus. Now, Fabrosaurus, that is not a very well-known dinosaur. Part of the reason is because it's probably dubious. A lot of the fossil material seems to be like pretty similar to some other types of dinosaurs, like Lesothosaurus, which is still a valid taxon. I think as it currently stands, most researchers do think that Fabrosaurus it was a nomen dubium, which translates to doubtful name. I don't know if it is still technically like valid per se. I think it's more so just like up in the air. But it's got a fun little pink coloration with some reds and some blacks, and it's a cool little model. I quite like it. Oh, and then we have Gravitholus. Gravitholus, it is, you could probably tell from this image, it is a pachycephalosaurid. They also did have the dome on their head, much like Pachycephalosaurus did itself. Uh, this is a cool little design. I actually really do like this one. I like the coloration that it has, and I kind of like the overall build that it has. I think that's fairly accurate. That size chart is crazy though. That's like almost T-Rex in size. These size charts are certainly really interesting. Ooh, after that is Hadrosaurus, which is, as of right now, like the first discovered dinosaur in North America, and also the namesake for the family known as Hadrosauridae. Not a lot of people talk about Hadrosaurus, and this is a pretty cool design right here. I really like the colors that it has. The skull shape, I mean, it does seem like it's a tad bit shrink wrapped, but overall, I think that this is like a really fun design for a creature that doesn't show up too frequently. Ooh, the classic Iguanodon, a very iconic dinosaur that definitely should represent I in the alphabet, you know? So yeah, this is also a really, really interesting design. Pretty thin. I think right now, like the consensus is that Iguanodon and a lot of its relatives had relatively like beefy necks. And that's something that's not shown right here. And also, they would have had like decently large forelimbs and just a decently large body in general. The head shape seems to be pretty correct, and it does have a beak. Iguanodon did have a beak in life, and it does have the thumb spike, which is something that Iguanodon is quite known for. Wow, this is really an interesting dinosaur to have. Right here we have Yanenchia. This is it's a obviously it's a sauropod. It lived in the Tendaguru formation, and I don't really know if we know too much about this sauropod. So it's certainly an interesting inclusion, though I don't know what other J's they could include that would be, I suppose, like well known enough, especially at that time. So that's really cool that they like include animals that are lesser known, or at least they have the opportunity to include animals that are lesser known, so that children can learn about them. It's a cool design too. I really like the kind of like dark coloration that it has in its on its body, which is in stark contrast to the lighter coloration that it has on its neck and head. It's very cool. I quite like it. K is for Kentrosaurus. This is an interesting design right here. Now, for those of you who watched my many interpretations of Kentrosaurus video, you know that we don't exactly know if Kentrosaurus had a shoulder spike. That is just the most agreed upon placement of that spike is on the shoulders, because other close relatives have been found with with basically shoulder spikes. But there's also a chance that it had them on, like had those spikes on their hips. And sometimes people do portray them with their spikes on their hips. This is one of those. It looks like the spikes that are typically portrayed on the shoulders are a little bit further back, closer towards the hips, which is really interesting. It also has like a really like arched back and is like really kind of sloped, which is an outdated posture for a lot of stegosaurs, but it was fairly common at the time. The head shape looks pretty good though. Maybe the neck is a tad bit too small, but it does have the plates that kind of transition into the spikes, which is overall, that is pretty dang accurate. Colors are really cool too. Ooh, L is for Leptoceratops, a little ceratopsian that, like a species, lived in the Hell Creek Formation. In fact, back when Nanotyrannus was like first, like the very first time it was described as its own separate genus, they actually they portrayed that by having art of it chasing a Leptoceratops. Little fun fact. Leptoceratops is pretty unknown. Not a lot of people know about. There's a lot of animals that people don't know about that lived in North America towards the very end of the Cretaceous, and I feel like Leptoceratops is one of those. Small ceratopsians are always really awesome because when most people hear about ceratopsians, they mostly just think of the large ones like Torosaurus or Triceratops. But there were some that were just small, and they lacked like head ornamentation, or at least significant head ornamentation, and they lacked a pronounced frill. This one looks like he wants to hurt me. It's probably angry about the fact that not many people know about its existence. But it's a fun little design. I believe that Leptoceratops is thought to be bipedal though, instead of being quadrupedal like how it's portrayed right here. This next one's interesting. Not a dinosaur. M is for Macroplata. This is a plesiosaur that lived in the Jurassic. Sometimes, like a lot of these books, of course, their whole goal, like their whole shtick is dinosaurs. A to Z, but then they'll include some non-dinosaurs. And what's funny is that they weren't at a shortage of M. There's like one really good dinosaur that they could have placed in M that would have made a lot more sense. That being Maiasaura. Maiasaura is actually a very important dinosaur for our understanding of dinosaur parenting and whatnot. So I think it would have been a better inclusion than a plesiosaur. But plesiosaurs are always really cool to see. You know, it's interesting that animals like this once existed with their elongated neck and their streamlined body and their mouth full of these crazy teeth. I want to read what they say about them too. While those dinosaurs are walking around on land, eating boring old plants, or even each other, we sea reptiles spend our time swimming and eating fish. I have these great flippers that help me swim fast. So it pretty much did acknowledge the fact that my Macroplata is not a dinosaur, which is cool. That's always, you know, it's cool to bring that up. But still, if you know, the whole book is named Dinosaurs, I feel like Maiasaura would have been a better inclusion, but I digress. It's not a big deal at all. I'm not making it a big deal. All right. And it's for Nodosaurus. Nodosaurus, the namesake for the family Nodosauridae. Yeah, no, it's a type of ankylosaurian. Nodosaurids were often pretty distinct from ankylosaurs. Ankylosaurs, they're best known for having like clubs on their tails or other such structures. Nodosaurids usually don't, but they were often covered with a ton of armor as well, kind of like how it's portrayed right here, though I don't think that it was quite as armadillo shell-like in life. The colors are really cool, though. I really like these colors, and I like the counter shading that's going on. Ooh, O is for Ouranosaurus. You know, I think I know what Q is going to be, but we'll wait. But O is for Ouranosaurus. So this one's Ouranosaurus is a very, very cool dinosaur. It's a hadrosaur form, which means it's not quite a hadrosaur. It is an ornithopod, and it is decently related to hadrosaurs, but it's not a hadrosaur itself. It did have this very thin snout that was almost kind of like a duckbill in a way. It was very elongated, but it likely had a lot of soft tissue, unlike how it's portrayed right here. And most notably, Ouranosaurus did have a sail on its back, very similar to Spinosaurus. But one big common misconception with Ouranosaurus is that a lot of people think that it did live with Spinosaurus, but in fact, it did not. It lived like it went extinct before Spinosaurus ever showed up, which is always, I think, a really interesting fact. A lot of people think that they lived together, mostly due to documentaries like Planet Dinosaur. And they also did give it its thumb spike. Ouranosaurus did have a thumb spike very similar to Iguanodon. I like this one. I like the colors on this one. P is for Parasaurolophus. I like this one. Its neck is way too thin, of course. Hadrosaurs had pretty beefy necks. Everything else, I think, looks really good. I love the way that the crest looks. I love the beak. I love the colors. I love the way that its body looks. It even has that little dip towards the middle of its back, which is something that Parasaurolophus did have. Its forelimbs are not nearly as fused together as they likely would have been in life, but, you know, minor nitpicks, all things considered. This one's sick. I think that this one has like my favorite colors of any animal that we saw so far. I knew it. Q for Quetzalcoatlus. Obviously, it's not a dinosaur as well, but Quetzalcoatlus is still, it's very cool to mention that there was a pterosaur that was like this, you know, a giraffe-sized pterosaur that was literally flying around in the late Cretaceous period. It's very thin right here, and it does, actually, no, it does seem like it has small amounts of fluff, little pycnofibers, aka feathers, basically. The head shape is also really interesting, very tiny, but this is really not a bad depiction overall. Like, it's mostly just like small things that kind of separate it from our up-to-date understanding of the animal. I want to read about this one too. I am a flying reptile that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs. There we go. We established that this is not a dinosaur, which is very important, especially for children's books. Like, children still need to learn. You know, it's good for children to learn. So if you put some educational things into their books, that will help them overall. You know, I think that that's like a great thing. So it's like, you know, it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it's still cool. It's books like this are why I was able to correct adults when I was a child and say that, hey, no, that's not a dinosaur, that's a pterosaur, you know, so books are important. I lived at the same time as dinosaurs. I am the biggest of my kind and the largest creature ever to fly. I like to eat fish, but sometimes I scavenge for scraps of meat. That's outdated, though. It was once thought that Quetzalcoatlus was a little bit more of a fish eater, and it was also thought that it was only a scavenger. It's now thought that it would land and then chase down its prey, like literally run after its prey. It was a predatory animal. It didn't rely on scavenging or fishing. So yeah, no, that's like the one thing, but everything else seems to be all right. Ooh, R is for Riohosaurus. Now, Riohosaurus, it's a sauropodomorph. Um, this depiction right here is a little bit outdated. Riohosaurus, it was once thought to be like an obligate quadruped because its forelimbs are like the same size as its hind limbs, which is usually something that is interpreted as a quadrupedal, like something that supports a quadrupedal stance. However, more recent analysis suggests that like I believe like the shoulder girdle and like the structure of the forelimbs indicates that it was a bipedal animal, a lot like some earlier basal sauropodomorphs. So this is a little bit outdated right here. It probably should be standing upright instead, or just standing on its hind limbs rather, instead of standing on all four legs. Very cool colors though. Oh, and it is dragging its tail. Tail is held down really low. It would have been held a little bit more up instead of how it's shown right here. I want to read what this one says too. I am one of the oldest of all the plant-eating dinosaurs and the first to have a long neck. I have big, heavy, strong legs, and my bones are very solid and thick. I'm about 36 feet long. I don't think they're quite 36 feet long. I think estimations have been all over the place. Like I think I've heard like around 33 feet, and I think I've heard like around 20 feet. Maybe 36 is not outside of the realm of possibility, I suppose. I don't know. But yeah, no, it was one of the first like big plant-eating dinosaurs as well. One of the first to have a long neck too. The basal sauropodomorphs, they often did have traits that later more derived sauropods would have, like a long neck and a relatively small head. Oh, this one's interesting. S is for Stenonychosaurus. So Stenonychosaurus or Stenonychosaurus, which is sometimes how I pronounced it. But so this fella is a troodon. It's a troodontid. There was a long point in time when troodon was split into two different species known as Lanton and Venatrix and Stenonychosaurus. So yeah, nowadays though, there was a proposed neotype for troodon, which means that troodon would be valid again. And I think it was proposed that Stenonychosaurus was a junior synonym of troodon, which would certainly really be interesting, which means that this fellow would be simply just be troodon. It's a very interesting design. He's got like spikes on his back and this really cool coloration. He does have lips though. That's really cool. I kind of want to read what this one says too. I'm a very smart dinosaur and I have very good eyesight, which helps me when I'm out hunting for food. People always call me Troodon, but I prefer Stenonychosaurus. Oh, interesting. That's interesting. I didn't think we'd see a reference to that. But it seems likely that they did have they were relatively intelligent. Their brain size in comparison to their body was pretty large. At least that's true for troodontids in general. So it probably would apply to Stenonychosaurus. Anyway, we'll go ahead and move on to T, which is for Triceratops. Very interesting that they kind of like held back and didn't use Tyrannosaurus. You think that they would, but hey, that's fine. Triceratops deserves a lot of recognition, and I remember seeing this model everywhere. So it's an interesting design, that's for sure. It has all of the traits that you would expect. It has the frill, it has the horns, although they seem to be kind of like angling outwards a little bit more, like out to the side, laterally to the side, more so than kind of going forward, which is a little bit more true. But it's not really too far off, so I guess it's not really that big of a deal. The nasal horn is present as well. It does have a beak, which is true, and it says sharp beak for cutting up plants. Very true, very true. I want to read what they say about this one. I live in a herd with other Triceratops. If any other dinosaurs try to hunt us, we bash into them as hard as we can using the 3 sharp horns on our heads. Yeah, probably. Those horns probably would have been pretty effective. In terms of the herds, we don't really know if Triceratops lived in herds. The most we've found evidence for is groups, like small groups, like of up to 5 individuals, rather than these vast herds, which is sometimes how people picture animals like Triceratops. That's not to say that it never happened. There's still a possibility that they did move in herds, but we just don't quite know yet. Oh, and then right here we have Ultrasauros. So Ultrasauros doesn't exist. It's currently identified as a junior synonym of Supersaurus, which is a diplodocid that lived in the Jurassic, of course. This fella certainly looks a lot more like a brachiosaurid, especially in the head, the way that the head looks. And of course, the name is, the name is not really correct. Oh, but I see Supersaurus in the text. Let's actually read about it. Scientists first called me Ultrasaurus, but I am now known as Supersaurus. Hey, I like both names, and I think you'll agree. I am most definitely a supersized dinosaur. Dinosaurs like me are among the biggest creatures ever to have lived on Earth. So that's awesome. They acknowledge the fact that Ultrasaurus does not exist anymore, technically speaking. Like as a name, it's simply just a junior synonym of Supersaurus. That's awesome. I like that. But again, I don't think the design really matches up too well to what Supersaurus likely would have been like in life. Cool colors, though. Like the colors. V is for Velociraptor. Look at this naked fella. So the skeletal shape seems to match up pretty well. It does have like a very narrow, thin snout that Velociraptor did have. It also does have slit pupils, which is possible for Velociraptor. There's a good chance that Velociraptor was like a nocturnal ambush predator that just like laid low to the ground, which means that slit pupils would make sense for an animal like that. It's very skinny and it does lack feathers. Velociraptor did have feathers. We have found quill knobs on its ulna, which is its arm bone. That's something that can be found on many modern day birds, and that indicates that there were feathers attached there, which is just really cool. I want to read what they say about this one too. In fact, I probably should have been reading most of them, but then that'd be a long video. I am one of the scariest dinosaurs around. My name means speedy predator. We hunt in packs using the sharp claws on our middle toes to catch our dinner. Very true. And their middle claw, they did have that sickle claw that everybody knows and loves. It was likely used to pin prey more so than anything. Like it couldn't really slash at the prey. It didn't really have any serrations or anything like that. The information seems to be pretty good, and the skeletal structure seems to match up. It's just the lack of feathers, which is the biggest thing, and the fact that it's breaking its wrists. It is holding them like a bunny rabbit instead of holding them like it's about to clap. W is for Wananosaurus. This one's cool. It's a basal pachycephalosaurian dinosaur. It did have like a flat skull as it's portrayed right here, which is very different from other pachycephalosaurs that we all know and love, like Pachycephalosaurus itself. It's a lot like Homalocephalae in that way, and the fact that it doesn't have a dome on its head, and it was relatively small too, which is how it's kind of portrayed right here. Very cool, very cool. X is for Xenotarsosaurus. Now that's a deep cut. That's one that probably a lot of people wouldn't really know about. Xenotarsosaurus, I think it currently still stands as an abelosaurid, but I think there's a lot of question in that classification. I think there was like some question on whether or not it was like a Neoceratosaurian. But I think that it's also still just considered to be a type of abelosaurid, which is abelosaurids. There that includes animals like Carnotaurus, Majungasaurus, Abelosaurus itself. Those animals. So yeah, and they portrayed it like an abelosaurid right here. It looks very similar to Carnotaurus. We don't have any skull material of Xenotarsosaurus, so we don't know what its skull looked like. It could have had brow horns like this fella does right here, very similar to Carnotaurus, but we simply just don't know. It's also oversized in this diagram. Like that is huge, absolutely huge. Colors are really cool, and the arms don't seem to be really too proper. It kind of looks like they have elbows. Abelosaurids didn't usually have elbows. They basically just had like wrists. Maybe Xenotarsosaurus did though. I don't think we have our material either. Very cool animal, though. Very, very cool. Yingshansaurus. Obviously, this is a stegosaur. Lived in China during the Middle Jurassic, I do believe. We do have like a decent amount of skeleton material associated to Yingshansaurus. And interestingly, I think that some of that material includes shoulder spikes, which is absent here. So that might be a little bit of an inaccuracy, but it does have like a long neck, which is possible for Yingshansaurus. I don't think we have any neck material per se, but like we do have like legs and we do have like the forelimbs, and that stuff seems to match up. It is dragging its tail though, which is something that it probably wouldn't happen in life. And this one's very interesting. Z is for Zephyriosaurus. Zephyriosaurus, it's an ornithischian dinosaur. Lived in North America. That's a very cool inclusion. I mean, it's got a very interesting kind of like a standard small ornithischian dinosaur design right here. It does lack feathers. There's a chance that it had feathers in life. But it's a cool design. You know, it's again, very classic design. I want to read what it says. I am small, I eat plants, and I can run pretty fast. My long tail helps me keep balance, and that makes running quickly a lot easier. I really like my name. It means West Wind Reptile. Very cool, very cool. And yeah, and then we get this nice size chart of some of the oversized fellas. It doesn't look like, is everything on here? Maybe. No, that was very cool. It's always like a real treat to go back to some books that I had as a child. I'm sure that my daughter's going to absolutely love that book, even though there is some outdated things in that, which that makes sense. And that simply just happens with a field like paleontology. Things are going to evolve the more that we learn, the more that we discover, will like further our understanding of these animals. And yeah, of course, we're going to know more now than we did back then. But it was a lot of fun. Those models are incredibly nostalgic for me. Again, I saw those models all over the place when I was a child. So it makes sense that they would be in another book like that. So yeah, be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And if you like dinosaur related content, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you on board. That's the kind of stuff that we do around here. And until next time, thank you so much for watching and have an awesome day.